Now back on House Bill 3455.
Amendment number 1 is the committee report.
Amendment number 1, Mr. Sandifer's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, the amendment really clarifies what the intent of this bill was when we received it. It deals with the installation of residential swimming pools. The amendment simply adds the residential swimming pool installers to the list of residential specialty contractors.
Question is adoption of amendment number 1. All in favor say aye. All opposed? Amendment number 1 is adopted. We on the bill now? Clerk will read.
No further amendments to 3455.
Mr. Hill is recognized to speak on 3455 as amended. Let me get some order, Mr. Hill. Mr. Hill is recognized.
Thank you, members. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if anyone spent any time studying this before today, other than the committee members, which I assume did study this. This is one of those where the committee amendment radically changes the bill itself in the way that it's drafted. So it was originally drafted to go in Section 40, Title 40, Chapter 11, Section 410, and the committee amendment instead changes a completely different section of code, Chapter 40, Title 59, Section 20. And the effect of this bill is that it requires anyone that is going to install a swimming pool in South Carolina to become a residential specialty contractor. So it adds pool installers, swimming pool installers to a list of other occupations that are required to be residential specialty contractors, which includes plumbers, electricians, HVAC installers, siding installers, insulation, roofing, flooring, masons, drywall, carpenters, stucco, and painters. And members, I would suggest to you that there are a few issues with this. Number one, there's no compelling reason that I'm aware of to do this. Now, let me explain why I believe that's the case. Number one, you don't have to have a license as a contractor to pull a permit to install a pool, number one. Number two, those pools still have to be compliant with state building codes, and they're going to get it inspected at least once, if not twice. Some pools are inspected twice during the installation process by the local jurisdiction. I would also suggest to you that free market competition is an effective check on bad actors, and that's true across the board. If you go to a bad auto mechanic and they mess you up, you have recourse. You can, there are many different private sector solutions. There's Angie's List, there's Yellow Pages, there's Yelp. There are many ways for people to get the word out about bad actors. There's also small claims courts, so you can sue your installer if he messes you up in some way. I would also suggest to you, members, that licensing creates an unnecessary barrier to entry into the workforce. We're all about creating jobs in here, aren't we? Then why throw up yet another barrier to someone getting involved? I love the story. I think Mr. Clemens did such a good job recognizing the Holocaust survivor earlier. And I make note of the fact that this guy went and he opened his own dry cleaning business. Now let's just pretend for a minute that this guy or someone like him had gone and tried to start a pool installation business. And let's pretend that we're doing this tomorrow, assuming this bill were to pass. And let's pretend the bill went into effect today and he wanted to set this up tomorrow. We're going to make him become a licensed contractor? Really? I mean, how does this not disproportionately hurt the disadvantaged people of our state. Let's suppose you're in that little group of people known as dreamers. You fall under the DACA Act. You don't have the documentation that you need to get certain occupational licensing in this state. You can't install a pool if this bill passes. It's one more potential job opportunity that's off the table for certain people. Certain people that can't provide the requisite documentation, certain people that can't afford licensing fees, certain people that can't afford perhaps going to school for it, even though they may be perfectly able to do the work and perfectly knowledgeable in what the work requires. This unnecessary licensing would hurt your chance at upward mobility. How do you pull yourself up by your bootstraps when the state is half the load on your back? The odds are already stacked against you. Why do we need to stack them even more against you? And for what reason? So I would suggest to you that this licensing is unnecessary for pool installers. This is too much. We have no compelling need for it. Any issue that this bill seeks to address, there's already recourse for currently today without creating this licensing requirement. So I would ask that you vote with me against this bill.
Mr. Hill, you have several people that have questions. Will you take questions, sir?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Hyatt recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Hill, for taking my question, and I think they've answered it over here for me. In the case when I built my pool at my house, I didn't contract. I went and found the guy that I knew to build my pool. So he had somebody else come in and dig the hole. Then they had somebody else come in and put the frame up. And then they had somebody else come in and put the vinyl liner in. So in that case, who has to have the license?
I think that's an excellent question. It's pretty ambiguous to me, Mr. Hyatt.
I mean,
Do you have to have a license to dig a hole in the ground?
that was my question. I don't know. That's the reason I asked you.
And, I don't have the answer to that. I think that would need to be addressed before we move forward with this kind of legislation. Perhaps there's more definitions that would need to be added. One other thing that was raised by the pool installer from back in Anderson that I spoke with this morning is that there's no attempt in this bill to actually grandfather anyone in. So anyone that's currently practicing, anyone that's currently installing, has a pool installation business that isn't already a licensed residential specialty contractor would be out of business until they get that documentation, until they get that credential. That's just ridiculous, folks.
Mr. Gary Smith recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you, too, Mr. Hill, for bringing this to our attention. Are you familiar with the Heritage Foundation?
I am, yes, sir.
Are you familiar with the Daily Signal, the articles they put out on a regular basis each day?
Yes, I do read those articles on occasion.
Are you familiar with the article that was written on February the 28th of 2018?
Help me out. What was that article about, Mr. Smith?
The article says, new study finds some licensing laws do more harm than good.
Yes, that has been a topic of interest of mine. There's a lot of research going on into that, and we have a lot of occupational licenses that I believe are dubious, and I think adding yet another one to that list would be a terrible idea for us, Mr. Smith.
Well, it talks about, there's been several studies that have been done over the recent years that talk about licensing and why licensing is a harm to the free markets and a number of other reasons. One of the things that we have been discussing and debating a lot over the last few years in this body, are you aware, is licensing across states. Are you familiar with that issue?
Yes, sir. We've dealt with that quite a bit on medical-related issues where doctors or nurses or physical therapists or many other practitioners that are licensed in other states have a lot of rigmarole to go through. And so we've been passing different interstate compacts that smooth that out, licensing reciprocity. So yes, you're right. When you regulate and when you license, you create a whole new set of problems created by the state that we could just avoid in this case.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the problems that it creates is that issue of how do you deal with licensure across states? Because the more we regulate, the more we put up licensure sorts of provisions, whether it's for, we now license braiding of hair and things like that, it becomes an issue for how you take and transfer those across state lines. Were you aware of that?
I am aware of that, yes, sir.
Well, one of the things that the study points out is that it also inhibits a lot of other things. Let me read this to you. It said, burdensome licensing regulations such as the thousands of training hours most states require to become a barber or cosmetologist have been found in previous research to raise consumer costs.
Hold on, Mr. Speaker, I'm having a little trouble hearing Mr. Smith.
Let me get some order, Mr. Hill. Mr. Hill has stepped away. Mr. Sandifer moves to adjourn debate on this bill until next year. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. Debate's adjourned on House Bill 3455.